All right, Andy, it is great to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Mike Kim, thank you so much. I am honored to be here. I've been on a lot of podcasts, but I don't think there's one I've ever been more excited about than this one because I'm a regular listener and a fan, and I'm just excited.
Oh, stop it. You flattery will get you everywhere.
Yes, that's why I do
it. Yes, that's why you do.
But it's true. But it is the truth. I actually, even though I produce 2 podcasts and I used to listen to a lot of podcasts, I don't listen to that many these days. And yours is one of 2 or 3 that I actually listen to on a regular basis.
That's high praise coming from someone of your stature and skill and accomplishments. So, thank you. I will receive that compliment wholeheartedly. You are really like not an enigma, but a very fascinating person for me to see, like in your career arc, because you do a lot of different things. I shared in the little intro kind of what you do and what you're up to. We of course met through our mutual friend Lauren Davis. Anyone Lauren introduces me to seems just to be almost as awesome as she is, and vice versa. Almost. True. Right? Because Lauren's still top dog in everything. But
it's a high bar.
Yeah, it's a high bar, right? But I remember a couple months back, I was stopping through Dallas, and then we connected online. And you're like, "Oh, dude, you should come out to this." I'm hanging out here at the LinkedIn conference, and I went over there and got to see you in your element, and that was really awesome. And you've really, over the last couple of years, focused on this talent development space. And this is going to be sort of a meta interview, I think, for a lot of folks, because they're going to hear us talking about what you've done, but they're going to see that like it's very possible to succeed in a different niche than the one that I usually talk about, because I'm not in talent development. I'm not in corporate. I mean, I don't know the last time that I've ever done it. Like, it's been years since I did a corporate gig. So how did you get into the talent development space? I think I know it's a baseline question, but how did you get into that space?
Well, I think it's a great conversation that's beneficial to a lot of people that might listen to this, thinking about, choosing a niche, going all in on that niche, or especially if you're thinking about doing something in corporate, which is where I spend most of my time and do most of my business. So I got into consulting about 10 years ago. I worked for a global consulting firm called BTS and worked with a lot of big companies, got the opportunity to start to create and facilitate these workshops, business simulations, and travel all over the world, facilitating different countries and cities. It was an awesome job and a great opportunity. I learned a ton. And about 3 years ago, I made a switch. I moved out from there to go in more independent affiliated with a smaller company called Advantage Performance Group. And I knew I needed to go all in, obviously, on sales. It's, 100% sales commission, whatever you want to call it, when you're out there building a business. And I decided that I really needed to focus in on one niche, one type of client to really try to go after. And though I had worked with other line executives like CFOs and head of chief technology officers, things like that, the most common client that we would work with would be the head of talent development or learning and development. So I said, I'm just going to go all in on that type of client and target them, creating content, building the network, trying to find ways to meet with them, add value, and then get more business in that space. And there's been lots of trade-offs to that along the way, pros and cons. But for the most part, it's been really beneficial to go in on that. And it was actually a situation where, sometimes people always say, like, follow your passion. What are you really excited about? And I think when I made that decision, I wasn't really that excited or passionate about it. It was more of a logical decision. But as I really dug into it and started interviewing people, networking in that space, and just getting to know that world, I really started to like it and get passionate about what they were doing and the cause. And that allowed me to help further it and build my network more in that space.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because years ago I read a book called Business Brilliant by, I think his name was Lewis Schiff or something like that. Or am I talking about the center? Anyways, called Business Brilliant. And the premise of the book was that the author surveyed a bunch of middle-class Americans and then surveyed a bunch of very wealthy Americans and busted all these myths. And follow your passion was one of them. So it's like, follow your passion and the money will follow. Well, the vast majority of middle-class Americans believe that to be true. And the wealthy Americans, like, none of them said that was true. Like, you go follow the money, right?
Yeah.
And so it was really interesting to hear that, because it was a dose of reality. I don't know a ton of millionaires. At that time, I didn't know a ton of them.
Yeah.
So this book was really, really good insight. But it grew into a passion for you. And there is no school that you can graduate from that then says, I'm a consultant. So you created content, I heard you say. You grew your network. You added value. What came first? When you look back on those days, like, what did you do first to position yourself as a consultant?
Well, it's to start as a consultant. I got hired by a consulting company, and then I started calling myself a consultant right away. Because I hired into a consultant position.
Right.
But when I went on my own 3 years ago, I kind of kept that going, and even though like I'm doing facilitation, speaking, creating workshops, sales is really kind of the main thing that I'm doing. Consultant is kind of that catch-all safe place to be in the corporate space that, allows you to say, hey, I'm helping you solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sorry, this real life during this. I've
Real
got
life.
children to my office all the time. Hang on, buddy. I'm in the middle of an important interview.
Just start me so I can do by myself.
Okay.
This is awesome.
This is life under COVID-19, by the way. No more school.
This is
it's
real life
all day, and small office doing interviews all the time. But I kept that consulting going, and then.
Well, then, Daddy, then you have kids.
I do have kids.
You do have kids.
Second, good thing you have an editor for this. Give me a couple minutes, buddy. Thank you. All right, he's gone. So it's kind of the safe way to go into, I think, to big companies and show that you're strategic and know what you're talking about. But then obviously people want to know, do you have experience with their niche, with their industry, with that function? And so that's where I went in and said, I work with a lot of talent development, learning and development leaders. And then again, started creating content in that space to show, to position myself as an authority in that space as well.
Did you did the podcast come pretty early for that industry when you started out? Or was that a little bit later?
I had a podcast already, so I had a little bit of experience in podcasting. I created one on entrepreneurship called the Entrepreneur Hot Seat, which eventually morphed into the Andy Storch Show, which you've been a guest on. Mm-hmm. And so I had that experience, and what it taught me, and I know you've seen the same thing, and any of your listeners who have podcasts have seen that it allows you to have conversations with people that you wouldn't normally get to talk to, right? You get to interview people, and it's kind of like removes that barrier. So when I made the move, I said, I've already got a lot of experience as a consultant networking and trying to book meetings with potential clients using LinkedIn and cold email and stuff like that. But a lot of times they say no and ignore me. Maybe if I start a podcast, that will allow me to book more meetings with them, get in front of them. And I remember when I was going, it took me a while because I hesitated with certain things and trying to figure out which niche to go with. And I remember there was a moment before I started it where I posted in this podcast group on Facebook. I don't know if it was Podcast Movement or one of the other ones. And I said, hey, does anybody out there have a podcast focused on corporate where you're interviewing corporate people? I'd like to just see, if this is possible, because I was worried that a lot of companies would put the kibosh and say, no, you can't go on that podcast, corporate communications, that sort of thing. I pretty much got crickets except for one person who said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Like, that was the only comment that I got. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is going to work. And so I started. I remember when I got that first guest, she was head of talent development at this mid-sized company in Atlanta. And then I started booking more. And there was the really big aha moment when I booked this guy named Brandon from a big airline, Delta Airlines. And I had sent him many emails and LinkedIn messages to try to book meetings with him. And he always ignored me. He had too much going on. But when I sent him a message and said, hey, do you want to be a guest on my podcast? Here's a calendar link. And he booked it right away. And then we got on Zoom and we built a relationship. And eventually he became a client. And, and we developed a friendship. And it was like, wow, revelation. this is a way to break through and build a relationship with people. It's a way for me to learn about what's going on in the industry, build my network, build relationships with those hard to get clients. So I kept doing that more and more. And I've done, I don't know, over 150 interviews now with a lot of heads of learning and development, chief HR officers, stuff like that, and just built a big network in that space. The podcast has over 100,000 downloads. It's not crazy huge, but it's done very well also because it's a defined niche. People don't find it because of me or any of the great, posting I do on social media. They find it because they're on iTunes looking for, I wonder if there are any great podcasts out there about talent development. And then they find it and they start listening to it. And that's how most of the people find it as well. And so it's allowed me to build the network, educate myself and of course build authority in that space.
I think that's just brilliant. You interviewed your future clients. That's how you.
Yeah, it's worked really well. And there's been others, and many others that are either become friends or will be clients one day. We find a way to work together. It all started with those podcast interviews.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. This sort of ties into what I know that you do with a lot of your actual podcasts on talent development and experiential learning. And I look at what you did. I mean, you learned through experience. You learned to interview people by just interviewing people. You learned to podcast just by podcasting, and then it branched off into a second podcast. I think that this is really kind of a topic I'm really fascinated by, because now this personal brand space has sort of matured. It's kind of like here, right? Being an online course creator is not a revelation anymore. Like, this has been around for a while. There are definitely people out there who don't get it still, but you and I know that this is, just not just the now, but it's the future. Can you share some thoughts on what experiential learning means for you and to you and the work that you guys do? Because I think anytime we can dive into that, especially as course creators and as people, I educate people, I want to know how to do it better.
Yep.
What is it?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's something I've been doing for, close to 10 years. And in my experience, what I've learned through that time is that people learn best through experience. We can learn from reading, from listening, from watching. But if you think back to all the big lessons you've learned in life, a lot of them, most of them have come from experience, even from making mistakes, right? And the way I usually explain it is, if you think about athletes, sports, and especially the military, they spend most of their time practicing before they ever end up in a game, right? Before they ever end up in the big situation where everything's on the line. Sometimes in the military, during certain periods of peace, you spend your whole career practicing and rarely even have to engage necessarily, but they're ready when they need to be. In business, I find most of the time people come up with an idea and then they just go do it, or tell the people on their team, go do this, go pitch this to the client or whatever it may be, without ever really practicing. And so I see experiential learning generally as a place to be able to practice in a safe space, practice failing in a safe space. So if you're creating courses, you're creating learning, are there ways where you can give people opportunities to practice? Maybe it's a role play, or they're pitching something, or maybe they're submitting some answers that could be reviewed. Maybe there's an interactive portion of it where they can, try certain things and see if they're right or wrong. There's a lot of different things you can do with it. And related to that, with all the learning, all the workshops that I run, whether they're in person or virtual, we try to make them as interactive and experiential as possible, so that people are not just sitting around listening and learning. You can learn, but especially virtually, people tune out pretty quickly. If you're just sitting around statically listening to somebody talk, unless it's just a really interesting, engaging topic. So that's why, even at a basic level, and I don't have nearly as much experience as you in maybe running webinars and things like that, but to the extent you can use polls and get people to chat, and even interact with each other a little bit, it gets them to be more active in the learning, and they're going to learn more, and you're going to keep their attention longer. And that was the same premise, by the way, that I launched my conference with. So I co-hosted a conference earlier this year with my friend Bennett Phillips. And the impetus for it was that we were going around in the space looking at other conferences in the HR and talent development space and thought they were all boring. And we knew we could do something better if we created something that was more experiential and interactive. And so that's what we did.
Can you go into that a little bit? Because I heard about that conference. I heard really great things about how different it was and how very interactive it was. I think Lauren was the one who told me about it.
Yeah.
But it's funny because I love hosting events. I love doing workshops. I don't really like attending them that much because it is like you said. It just becomes a long day. I certainly don't want to sit and hear someone talk for 6 hours, even if the content is great.
Yeah.
So what did you guys do in that to kind of like boost the experiential learning for your people there?
Yeah. So like to reiterate, I said I would go to a lot of these HR or talent development type conferences so that I can network and try to find clients. Another way to stand out, meeting people in person because they're getting all the cold emails and stuff on, email and LinkedIn or whatever. But they were all the same, like death by PowerPoint. Usually the presenters are not even very good speakers, right? They're not that polished and they're just showing slides and talking. And it gets so boring. And not taking anything away from those people, like you can certainly learn some things. And I always made some great connections, but I felt like we could do something better. And I wanted to create something that was really interactive and experiential. And most of, like I said, my main business is selling and running experiential learning programs. So we had plenty of not only of those solutions, those programs to draw from, but I also have a huge network of speakers and facilitators who are in that world of we need to make things more interactive and experiential. So it was easy to go, find many of those facilitators to come participate. We booked a couple big name speakers in the space because we figured people are going to be like, who the heck are you? To kind of, validate the event. So one guy named Josh Burson, who's probably the biggest name in HR. He has 800,000 followers on LinkedIn. We got him booked as a keynote speaker, and then a couple others who were pretty big names. And then we went out and designed a conference. It was 2 days with every single session except for one, which was Josh Burson's opening keynote, was kind of more of a standard stand and speak with slides. Every single session after that, whether they were breakouts or main sessions, were interactive. There were exercises in between, sharing lessons. People were interacting with each other. And it was just, there was so much more energy in the room. People loved it. We created a lot of time for networking. We had a great, dinner organized for people to be able to network more. And we just kept it very interactive the entire way. My main goal with that, I see myself as a connector. I love connecting people. I love networking. I know you do as well. And I wanted people to be able to connect with each other. A lot of people go to conferences just to learn. That was not this conference. We called it the think tank on purpose. We wanted people to show up and be ready to not only network with each other, support each other, help each other solve real problems. And that's what we did. And at the end of the 2 days, and I wanted a lot of people to know about it. So I hired Lauren Davis, your friend who's been on this podcast, to run our social media. And she was amazing. There were just like nonstop awesome posts on Instagram and LinkedIn every day, getting tons of views, which was so cool. She's so great at what she does, and I'm really grateful that she was there. She also coached us through some of the process in the beginning because when we decided to host a conference, neither of us had ever done that before. And Lauren has a lot of experience running events, working with you, working with others. She runs her own. So I hired her to give us some consulting at the beginning to kind of coach us on how should we be able to set this up. And but then at the end of the day, we had over 100, close to 150 people there, and 100% people told us that was one of the best, if not the best conference they've ever attended. And there were a lot of factors that went into that, but I think the main one was the way we set up the agenda and the flow and had everybody moving around and talking and interacting. So there was never really a dull moment in the entire 2 days.
I love that. I just, I think it's the more and more I move in, like, especially in my career, more and more events I've been to, I shy away from, just rigid stuff. Like a lot of the events I go to, I just hang out in the hallway and talk with people.
Yeah.
It's just easier to connect with people that way,
That's where the real value comes from.
Yeah. We did that many times. As you look at this whole corporate consulting space, you've clearly found your niche. Do you see the corporate consulting space drying up because of all that's happened across the world with the pandemic? Do you feel like companies are going to be slow in coming back? What would you say to those consultants out there who are listening to us right now, a little bit worried about the market? What do you see happening there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm an optimist. So there's, the answer you're going to get from me is like, heck yeah, it's going to get better. How do we change this challenge into an opportunity? I'm like always talking about that. I've heard you talk about that as well. I think that if you're an independent consultant, you're in the consulting space, honestly, like obviously it depends on the niche, the industry, that sort of thing. But I think this creates so many opportunities because a lot of companies are contracting, they're laying people off. Presumably many of them will be coming back, and they may want to go with hiring consultants, in contract roles before they decide to commit to full-time resources. As we move further into what many call the future of work, which is always coming, right? But which includes, I think, more of what we've been hearing about forever, the gig economy, which means more project-based work, whether that's internal consulting and project-based work or hiring consultants on the outside. I think it creates more opportunities for that. Also, if you're in consulting, even if your industry or niche is down right now, for instance, my biggest client is in the oil and gas space. They have gotten pummeled in the last few months. They're not doing any new work with me in the next few months, right? I understand that. But now is the time, I think, to be having a lot of conversations with people, to be checking in, to be building those relationships, to be ready when things come back. People are moving around a lot. Just in the last 3 days, 3 or 4 of my corporate contacts, people who come to my conference or been on my podcast, have messaged me to tell me they just got laid off. There's a lot of that happening, and they're going to land new places, right? So you've got to keep in touch with people, be active on LinkedIn, see where people are ending up, because they're going to end up in a new company, and that company may be doing well. There's some companies that are doing great right now, right? Amazon is trading at an all-time high. There's winners and losers in this. And the other thing that I've found in the last few weeks, and don't get me wrong, my business and my income is down right now through COVID because I was running in-person workshops for a living, and everything has been postponed, right, to the future. And I'm converting some of those to virtual, but some clients have been very slow to adopt that. But so that's been down. But what I've found is I've had a lot of conversations over the last 3-4 weeks, and it's because I found that corporate clients in particular have been more open to having conversations. They just kind of want to check in with people and see what's going on. And they're more available than they have ever been. And it's because nobody's traveling right now. Nobody's going anywhere. So in the old days, pre-COVID, I would get in touch with a senior executive CHRO or something and try to book something, and they'd be booked out for 5 weeks, and I might get a meeting with them in 2 months. I booked a meeting on Tuesday with a CHRO that happened like the next day this week. And that's been a lot. They've got a lot of stuff going on. Some of them are very busy, but their calendars they're just more available because they're not traveling, working on some of those bigger projects, running workshops, things like that. And so my strategy through all this is keep talking to more people, build more relationships, and some of those are going to turn into more work. I think it's going to pick up a lot more in Q3 and Q4. And when it does pick back up, who's going to get the work? The people that are top of mind, the people you've been building, they've been building relationships with, not the old contacts they haven't talked to in 2 years. So that's my encouragement, to get out there and keep having those conversations, even if it feels like it's slow right now, because it's going to pick back up eventually.
Oh yeah, there's no way. There's no way the world will continue on lockdown like this. It's just it's just not going to happen. I agree. I think there's just a lot of opportunity out there. Andy, this has been awesome. Just to kind of hear your journey and see where you're going. I know you're working on a book right now, so we'll certainly have you back once the book is closer to release. I'm excited about that. And thank you just for being like a great example of somebody who is really taken ownership of a niche that is outside of probably what a lot of folks, are used to hearing from me, especially because, I just kind of teach out of what I've experienced. But, meeting friends who are like niched in a certain industry, it's always really, really fun. And who knows, maybe one day I'll want to put on a suit again and go the corporate route. I'll be like, hey, you got a coaching program? Yeah. Teach me what to do, because there's a lot of opportunity there. I just have relished the freedom, but corporate they're going to be around.
It's huge money and opportunity. And now that people are more remote, there's less suits to put on anyway. So maybe it's better for your style. One other thing I want to mention that we didn't talk about at all, I just want to throw in the corporate, if you're in the corporate space or trying to sell into the corporate space, make sure you're on LinkedIn, you're leveraging LinkedIn. I'm on there all day, every day. There's a lot of great content creators. I'm creating content, interacting with a lot of people. It's just such a great platform. It's really blossomed from what it used to be years ago. And I think if you're selling into the corporate space, that's the number one place you've got to be. And so I always just want to remind people of that. You know, in addition to doing the podcast or whatever else other content creation you do, if you're selling it all in the corporate space, LinkedIn is definitely where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put the link to your LinkedIn for all those who are listening, as well as both of Andy's podcasts. You should check them out. Dude, thank you so much for joining us today. This is exciting. I can't wait to have you back once the book gets closer to being released. And I will see you somewhere soon. I'm sure of it.
It's going to happen. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
All right, man.
Hey, it's Mike Kim here. Thanks so much for checking out my YouTube channel where we talk all about building a personal brand business. That means you as a coach, a speaker, a content creator, how to market your content, how to create great content that people love. Make sure you hit that little notification bell, subscribe to the channel so that you never miss a video. So glad you're here.